A quick disclaimer before we begin, the PEMF podcast does not contain any medical advice, and the content provided is for informational purposes only. If you have any health concerns, please visit a healthcare professional. Welcome back to another episode of the PEMF podcast.
And today we're going to be doing our 7th episode of the mini-series PEMF Talk, where we answer your PEMF related questions that you've left below our podcast or on any of our social media channels. If you do want to see your question featured in the next PEMF Talk episode, make sure to leave them below this podcast or, as I said, on any of our social media platforms. But we're going with our first question, which actually came from YouTube. And it says, if you guys research PEMA devices, I cannot find any independent reviews, only marketing hype.
Yes, this is a good question because people might be like, what is PEMA? This is the PEMF podcast. And this device, a PEMA device, looks like the same product. They're talking about intensities, frequencies, magnetic fields, all that sort of thing. And yes, essentially it is the same product. So what people tend to be doing at the moment is making themselves a bit more unique in the PEMF industry. So we've seen this probably from one of the market leaders, Beamer. They call their device a vascular therapy device. Essentially, it's a PEMF device. But what they want to do, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but they're trying to make their product sound unique and stand out from the rest. But I think what they're doing in that instance is taking the message away from PEMF. And I don't really understand why manufacturers do that because of the many, many thousands of studies that are out there around PEMF. So why reinvent the wheel and create a new type of therapy when really you're marketing a PEMF device? So for me, it kind of goes against that. But a PEMA is another abbreviation of PEMF, and it's just their way of making their device a little bit more unique. And even PEMF has been re-abbreviated now. So if we look at the origins of PEMF, it's pulsed electromagnetic fields. But a lot of companies now are calling it pulsed electromagnetic frequencies. And it's, again, just kind of putting their device in a slightly different category and saying, yes, we are a PEMF device, but, we are a PEMF frequency device. And, we have this unique type of therapy. But essentially, a lot of the time, it's the same thing.
Definitely. It's an interesting point to bring up because we've started to see more and more kind of people do this. And obviously, it is kind of creating a little bit of confusion as well. But we'll move on to our next question. It just says from YouTube again, very informative. Have you guys reviewed the Bond Charge Mat Max?
So we don't tend to do specific product reviews because we want to be the unbiased PEMF podcast. So, we want to kind of give everybody a chance and we don't really want to make any enemies. But we also, on the other hand, want to give people honest advice and look at what they're buying. So the Bond Charge Mat Max, we haven't had one physically. No point for me to buy one in because effectively we've had a little look at this website and it is from the same manufacturer that makes a lot of different PEMF devices but brands them under different names. So if you look at these devices, they all look very similar. They have multitude of different therapies going on in them, red light, stone, crystals and all these sorts of things. But effectively, it's a very similar mat on the market and they call it different things. You've got Groony, higher dose, this one, Bond Charge. There's multiple names because effectively they are all just branded by the different manufacturer, by the different suppliers of these mats, but they all come from the same manufacturer in China. But the best thing that I would say is if you're looking at a specific mat and you want us to know how good these systems are, go back to our episode of the 10 top things. Ask those questions to that manufacturer before you buy. So, we talk about the intensity ranges, the where the devices are manufactured, how many coils it has, all that sort of thing. Go back to that episode, listen to that episode, and ask those questions to those manufacturers.
Great answer. And if you kind of want us to do maybe a whole episode about these multi-therapy mats, or if you have any other questions, as I said, leave them below the podcast and we'll get round to answering them. But our next question, once again, comes from YouTube. And it is about pets and PEMF, which we've actually done a whole episode on if you do want to go check that one out. But the question reads, what frequencies and Gauss are best for your pets?
A good question, because we have a lot of people that sort of say they want to use their PMF device on a pet, or they're buying a specific pet PMF device. But effectively, the easiest thing to do is just to look at the same things as you would be if you're looking at treating yourself or treating a human. You want to look at those low frequency ranges. Same thing. Take into consideration your pet's circadian rhythm. So use the higher frequencies in the morning, lower frequencies in the evening. Tend to not go too high intensity on pets, because they seem to absorb the therapy and actually take the therapy a lot more than humans do. So when I talk about super intensity, something over 1,000 Gauss is probably too much for your little pooch. So anything that is in the lower intensity ranges, if you have a system yourself, don't be afraid to use it on your pet. That's absolutely fine. And you can use the same frequencies that you do.
Yeah, great answer. And as I said, we've already done a whole podcast about PMF and pets where we go into all of that a lot deeper. So if you want to go check that one out, I'll link it below. But I'll go on to our next question. Once again, it comes from YouTube and it reads, loving the podcast. Thanks for all the info. Can PMF be done in conjunction with grounding, or would it be unnecessary / counterproductive to ground after using PMF device at a higher frequency in the morning?
Grounding, when we talk about grounding, there's two ways of grounding. Are we talking about going outside into the grass and grounding on the earth? Or are we talking about a grounding mat that someone's bought that's plugged into their wall? If you have a PMF device, personally, I don't see any point in using a grounding mat afterwards. But if you want to do a conjunction of PMF and grounding outside, that's absolutely fine. And there's not going to be any kind of counterproductive elements of that. But I get what you're saying. You want to be using a higher frequency in the morning with PMF, which is going to help you keep you going first things. But then if you go outside and you do some grounding, that's absolutely fine. It's not going to kind of like bring you back down to the earth frequencies. But something that happens quite a lot with grounding outside is a discharge of the electricity from the cells into the earth. So if you're talking about detoxing and discharging the body through grounding, that's a great thing. And I wouldn't say to anybody, don't do that if you've been using a PMF system, because the benefits of grounding outside and in nature is far outweighs sitting indoors for the rest of the day. So yeah, get your higher frequencies in the morning on your PMF mat, and then go outside and ground if you want to. That's absolutely fine. It's not going to be counterproductive.
And once again, we actually have done a whole episode on PMF and grounding. If you want to go check it out, I'll link it below the episode. But our next question, once again, comes from YouTube. And it reads, I heard from a doctor saying, if you have a bulging disc in your back, you should be very careful with the intensity because you could actually cause a herniated disc. What are your findings?
Good question. And it's a bit of a tricky one to answer, but I'll do my best without kind of going too in depth. But for me, obviously, you always have to listen to doctor's advice. That's what we always say to people. We're not medical professionals, so make sure you do listen to the doctor's advice. We're not aware of any adverse effects of PMF therapy, and we're not aware of any high intensity devices causing a herniated disc. However, I understand the logic behind it, and the logic behind it is that super high intensity devices can cause muscle contractions. So it can cause the body, when you're using super high intensity, to the body to move, the muscles to contract. And if you have someone in a very, very chronic state that has a bulging disc and they're kind of like almost convulsing, then there could be a risk. I'm not going to say that there isn't a risk for that, because also if you have someone that is in a chronic stage with a bulging disc and they bend over to pick something up, they also have a risk of herniating that disc. So yes, if you've got a super, super high intensity device, I would probably lower the intensity if you're in a chronic state with a herniated disc. But most PMF devices on the market won't cause those muscle contractions. Usually that's a device about 3,000 Gauss and above. And anything lower than that, personally, I would say is absolutely fine to use and would be super beneficial for a herniated disc. So I wouldn't shy away from those sorts of things. But again, if your doctor's giving you some advice, you should follow it.
Yeah, another great answer. We'll now move away from our YouTube questions and into our Spotify questions, which you can leave in the poll below. The first question reads, this was brilliantly simple. Thank you. So a great bit of feedback for us. That's obviously what we try and do, make this podcast as simple to understand as possible. I'm in the US and I'm looking at a PEMF mat promoted/sold by Gary Brecker. It's $5,000. I only want PEMF. I already have a Biomax 900 red light system. Can you suggest the top 5 PEMF mats? Do you have an opinion on Gary Brecker's mat? Thanks.
Okay, so as we mentioned on this podcast before, we don't want to be too biased towards certain systems. Gary Brecker's mat that they recommend is called the
Pure Wave
device. Thank you, Josh. And that device for me, it's a little bit dated. It's not a device that I have used myself personally, so I don't want to go too in depth on this system. But just from a small glance at the device, it's a little bit dated. It is a device that you need to plug into the wall, so it's slightly less portable. But also the intensity of this device is 0.4 Gauss, which, as we mentioned before, is classed as a low intensity system. It's very similar to that of the intensities you will get from grounding. So as we say, normally the Earth's natural magnetic field is about 0.5 Gauss. But as a PEMF device, it's not a bad one. So it's not one of the worst ones out there. It's one that you can get your morning frequencies in. And you can do those because a lot of the time people just aren't getting out and they aren't grounding and that sort of thing. So if you want a PEMF device that's got the low intensity range, that's fine. $5,000 is a little bit much to be paying for such a low intensity device. So there are other devices that offer slightly more intensity, or ones that you can even have higher intensity but lower them down if you want to. So it gives you that little bit more flexibility. But overall, it's not the worst system. And as I say, we don't want to get too in depth, but go back to our PEMF podcast episode where we give you the 10 top tips and ask them the question that's selling it. I think it's 10x Health, or it might be a local supplier that's selling that Gary Brecker system. Ask them the questions and then you can make your own mind up.
Yeah, great answer. We'll go on to our next Spotify question. And it reads, can you please speak more about PEMF and arthritis? What is the best frequency to use and how often? Would one expect just pain relief, or might the arthritis go away completely? Thanks. Love your show.
So actually, we've only just recorded a PEMF and arthritis specific episode. It'll either be on the week before or the week after this one that you're listening to. So hopefully it will already have been released, and that's one that you want to listen to. And it will give you an in-depth introduction into using PEMF therapy and arthritis. And a lot of the things we mentioned in that is the frequencies, the intensities, and all those sorts of things. So give that one a listen, and hopefully that will explain this a bit more, because arthritis is a big health condition that we deal with quite a lot with PEMF therapy because the benefits are so beneficial.
Definitely. And this comment was actually one of the reasons that we actually made that episode. So as I always say, leave your comments below and we'll get around to them. You could even have a whole episode dedicated to the topic that you want to listen about. But that is all of our Spotify questions. We will now move on to TikTok, which if you aren't following us on there, you should. It's loads of little bite-sized clips of the podcast, nice and shareable, nice and watchable. And yeah, should definitely go check it out. And the first question reads, hi mate, I have chronic trigger knots in my back, legs, and a herniated disc. Will it help? Can you please send me a link? I'm desperate due to pain.
So yeah, this is a one that is best answered by saying, we've mentioned this many times before that PEMF therapy isn't condition specific. So it's not a therapy that is going to be working specifically on the herniated disc or the trigger knots in the back. But it's going to be working on the body to create an environment in the body to heal. So it's going to help with those things. We've mentioned before about taking pain scores. For this person, definitely, why not try a PEMF therapy? A lot of PEMF systems will offer a 30-day trial. NewMed offer it, and other manufacturers across the world that will offer these trials. So buy a system, a full body system, especially for you, and try and get one again at a higher intensity. So it's really going to affect those deeper areas of the body, and try it. It's the only advice I can give to a lot of people is, unless you try it, you're not going to feel it. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. So give a PEMF device a try. See what responses you get. We've seen so many people with herniated discs that have had great responses. So it's always something that is just throw yourself in, try it. What's the worst that can happen, especially if you can return that device after a certain amount of time and get your money back.
Yeah, great answer, because that is kind of the answer for a lot of people's questions. You just sometimes got to try it and see if it works for you, because it most likely probably will. The next one, though, comes from TikTok. I have a MagnaWave. Are you familiar with them? Any thoughts on them?
So again, we try not to be too biased specific devices, but MagnaWave specifically, I've used a MagnaWave, and I thought it was great. It was a high intensity. So a MagnaWave is a super high intensity device. That is one that will give you muscle contractions at the highest intensities it offers. Specifically, we don't really get them in the UK or in Europe because we've tried importing them before and they don't have CE marking. So that is a problem for us, that it doesn't have the right certifications to get it into these countries. So one of the reasons why we don't import it and sell it through NewMed is that reason. But in general, as a high intensity option, the MagnaWave is a relatively good device.
Yeah, great answer. And that's obviously why you don't see it too much in the UK. Obviously in the US, you see especially a lot of kind of horse practitioners using the MagnaWave because of the super high intensities. But obviously just with the import issues, that is why it might not be as prevalent in the UK as it is over in the US. We'll go on to our next question, which once again is from TikTok. Is PEMF mat the same as grounding sheets?
So we've done a specific episode on this. So my answer to this really would be, if you want this answer answered properly, go back to that episode and listen to that. And that's the PEMF versus grounding. But in simple terms, no, they're not the same in terms of the fact that PEMF devices, you can get much higher intensities and you can regulate the frequencies. So you can use higher frequencies in the morning, lower frequencies in the evenings. So it's much better for your circadian rhythm. And grounding sheets, effectively, grounding you can get from doing it outside. And I would personally much rather ground on the grass in my garden than I would on a grounding sheet, just for the fact that, it's the ability to go out into nature and discharge through those means. And if you're going to buy a device between a grounding and a PEMF device, I would go for a PEMF device over that for the benefits of the intensities and the frequencies and just getting the grounding outside.
And yeah, as I said already, I'll link that episode down in the description. We're going to our next question from TikTok. Do you believe PEMF machine could reduce cervical spine instability and make the neck stronger, or no?
So again, this is one that PEMF isn't specific. It's working on the body to create an environment and the body to heal. So it's all about, applying the right intensities and frequencies to and frequently enough. So, my answer to that is yes, I do think it will help. Of course, I think it will help. It's one of them things that will help over time. And as long as you're consistent with it, using it with the right system. So this was in the spine. You want to find a device that is full body, that probably has the coils located down the center of the mat, not just the center of the mat, but it has coils in the center as well as outsides, because then ones are going to be specifically located on the spine. And then a device that is going to offer you a decent enough intensity. So, 20s, 30s Gauss, 40 Gauss, above that sort of range, that's going to get good penetration and a magnetic field strength. So yes, again, try it. It's one of them things. It's not going to happen overnight. This sounds like quite a chronic condition. But if you can take a pain score for the first month, and if you can buy a system that has a return policy, go for it. Why not?
Okay, great answer. And that was our last question from the TikTok. We'll now move on to Reddit. Some of these aren't direct questions that we got asked, but just questions on the PEMF subreddit, which we might not have necessarily answered before. So I thought they were good to include. And the first one comes on to PEMF books. You might have seen there's a whole range of PEMF books out there. But we just kind of thought we'd share what books that we have in the office. Because as this person kind of commented, there's millions of videos you can watch on the internet. And are the books more detailed kind of, and what is a benefit to maybe using the PEMF books or buying one of the books?
So when it comes to PEMF books, I've read a lot of those, and my go-to and my favorite PMF books is Dr. Paulock's second book. That's my kind of go-to book. The reason I say second book, because his first book was written and it's a great introduction to PMF therapy, but he goes very, very, very technical in that book. And to the average PMF user, it's probably a little bit too technical. But again, it's a good book to read. I think Dr. Paulock shares more similar values to what we do in terms of trying to be as much as unbiased as he can be. And he mentions different ways of applying PMF therapies with different products. So he's not one that is, only promoting or offering one system. So he's got he's got more of a ability to be unbiased. His second book is a little bit more, still technical, but it's a bit more PMF for dummies. And I think that's the book that more people should read because it just makes more sense. It's easier to read. And he has specific conditions in there that you can look at. The one thing I would say about those books is I feel like he does favor high intensity quite a lot. And it's not to say that I don't, it's just that, a lot of the outcome turns out to be a very, very high intensity system. Whereas I do necessarily think myself that people can get benefits with the lower intensity systems, but it's just a different time frame which you're going to get those responses. A really popular book that we get asked about a lot is PMF for Fifth Element of Health by Bryant Myers. And this book, for me, it has some really good information in it. I think what Bryant is doing to raise awareness of PMF therapy is great. However, he is probably one of the biggest distributors of the IMRS systems, and his book is very biased towards that system. So it kind of is used as a bit of a marketing tool to drive people towards that system, which, okay, a little bit, it's not the best way to do things, and it kind of puts Bryant down that unbiased situation, but the content in his book is actually a good read.
Yeah, definitely. I know I've read Dr. Paulock's second book quite a lot and gone through a lot of the pages on that, and it definitely is a lot more digestible than the first book and is some kind of really good info in there. I quite like that one. But yeah, we'll go on to our next question, which also comes from Reddit. My father has stage 4 cancer and has started using PMF mat to encourage bone regeneration and to manage pain. He used the mat for 2 consecutive days at 25% intensity for 15 minutes, but it has given him debilitating pain. Has anyone had similar experience? Is this temporary?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, actually, because this is rare, but it is something that happens. And it's something that happens when you introduce anything new to the body. So if people are getting a new massage, or if they're trying a new medication or something like that, it's very normal for things to get worse before they get better. It's the body's reaction. If the body starts to produce more inflammation temporarily, or if the body's starting to increase circulation in a certain area, it can trigger pain more. So yes, we do get that feedback, and generally the advice is, to continue, and over an amount of time, it is temporary. It will get better. You'll start to feel the benefits. However, with increased pain, we always recommend people go and talk to their doctor, because it could be something that's completely unrelated. So, we don't want to say to you, yes, keep going and it's going to get better, because like I say, the pain could be coming from something completely separate. So, but yes, that is a normal reaction, especially when people introduce PMF therapy for the very first time, and usually within a week, all that sort of thing subsides.
Yeah, great answer. Our next question is quite an interesting one as well, because it's something that's, funny enough, come up quite a lot recently in the office. The question reads, could PMF affect someone who isn't directly on it? I use my sparkle mat pretty much every night. I'm really curious if the PMF from the mat could be affecting my husband, who doesn't lay on it, but is near it. I accidentally left it running on deep delta when I got up the other day, and I had a hell of a time waking him up until I remembered and turned the mat off. Is this something that could be affecting their partner?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of does, again, come down to the intensity of the mat. The higher the intensity of the mat, usually the bigger the magnetic field. But that's absolutely normal. Even on lower intensity systems, you can get 1 meter, 2 meter, or even 3 meter range from these systems. So it's, when we're talking about PMF therapy, it's the pulsed electromagnetic field. So you're talking about the magnetic field that's coming from that mat that has the effects on the body. And absolutely, if you're laying on a full body system and you've got a partner laying within a couple of feet from you, most systems on the market that give a decent enough intensity will completely reach them and will be giving them a session at the same time. It won't be as intensity as it will be for you laying on the mat, but they will be benefiting from those frequencies. And if this specific question, they were used it on their delta frequencies. So delta frequencies is like 1 to 4 hertz. So that's where we are in our proper deep sleep. Yes, if you're running a device throughout the whole night on the delta frequencies, amazing for getting to sleep, but not so good for getting up in the morning. So yeah, it could absolutely be affecting them.
Yeah, another great answer. Something that does actually come up quite a lot. We'll move on now to our last question, which once again comes from Reddit. The question reads, I bought an EMF meter and tested the A9 ICE device. The readings fluctuated, but the highest that I got goes to around 85 to 95 milligauss. The site claims that the output's 200 gauss. I tested different coils and it's the same thing. Did I get a defective unit? And just for perspective on that, 95 milligauss is 0.095 gauss. So under 0.1 gauss. And obviously they were expecting a 200 gauss mat. So obviously a very long way off. What kind of do you think might have been happening there?
So there's a multitude of things that can be happening here, and I don't want to sit here and say that these guys are advertising the wrong things, but it could be one of the answers. So let me break down what could be happening here. So from a company that sells many different devices, we have tried testing PEMF devices, our own methods, and there isn't a cheap way to do it. I just want to put that out there. So if this person has just bought a EMF tester on Amazon or eBay or something for a couple of $100 and they think they're going to get an accurate reading, that's probably where the problem is. So it could necessarily be the person that's doing the testing that isn't getting the right device, that's not getting the right readings, because there's also, it's not simple to read pulsed electromagnetic fields. It's easy to read a strength of a magnet if you use some of these devices. But there's a few different ways, and we actually looked into this really in depth. And one of the manufacturers of the testing equipment said it even comes down to the way you hold the tester that can give you different results. So first of all, for something like this, we would need to do our own independent testing, and we do with a lot of our systems that we sell. But talking about the manufacturer, there's other things that could be in play here. So there's something called stacking, which we're seeing happening in the market quite a lot at the moment. And I think it's a bit naughty really from the manufacturers. And what we mean by this is people are they're advertising a max intensity. Say, for example, they're advertising 100 Gauss as their max intensity. However, the way they've got to that is they've added up all the intensities of each coil in their system. So if they've got 10 coils and each one is 10 Gauss, then they're saying our device offers 100 Gauss. From my perspective, that's incorrect. They should be advertising 10 Gauss because at the surface of the coil, you will get 10 Gauss. If you move the EMF detector around the mat, you're always going to get 10 Gauss. You're not going to get 100 Gauss. So stacking intensities, I think, is very wrong from the industry. I don't think people should be doing that. And that's a question you can be asking them. And the question should be, what is the intensity coming off one of your coils? And then hopefully they'll give you the correct information. Also, it can come down to where you're testing, when the manufacturers are doing the testing. So are they testing these in a lab conditions, and are they testing the actual surface of the coil? If they're testing the surface of the coil, you're going to get a higher intensity. When you've built the mat around it, you've put the foam on, you've put the any kind of layers that go on top of that, obviously you might be moving 1 or 2 centimeters away from the coil. 1 centimeter is a half-life, so you're going to lose half the intensity. So if then a consumer gets the mat and they're testing with the correct equipment and they're testing from the section of the mat, they may be getting a lot less intensity. So there's lots of factors in play here, but for me, a device should be they should be advertising what the intensity is of one of those coils and at the point in which the body is touching the mat. So they shouldn't be testing it from there. But It's quite common to get less intensity for people that are using the right equipment to test because of some of these factors. But I wouldn't say such a huge difference, such a difference from 200 Gauss to 0 point something Gauss, as long as that person's using the right test equipment, then I would be quizzing the manufacturer as to what's happening here.
So for them, you just maybe say, just talk to the manufacturer in this situation and see what they kind of come back with.
Yeah, I mean, give the results to the manufacturer, tell them what test equipment you're using, and maybe even show them a video. You need to give them a chance to explain what's going on here. But unfortunately, we are seeing manufacturers representing false intensities, because intensity is something that usually dictates the price. If you've got a super high intensity and a very low price, I would be questioning that.
Yeah, another great answer. But if you do have any other PEMF questions after this, or you actually have a whole topic maybe that you want us to make a whole podcast about, just make sure to leave them below the episode in the comments or on Spotify or literally wherever you are. And obviously while you're there, once again, make sure to leave us a follow. And if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. It just helps us make the episodes better every week and get bigger and better guests on.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the PEMF podcast.